In the Middle East, certainly in the Arab world, the situation is worse, and there is something of a new factor in the struggle to shape public opinion there. It is, and we've all seen bits and pieces of it, the 24-hour Arab television network Al Jazeera, which is based in the Persian Gulf. It's not the only one, but it has a particularly powerful reach throughout the region, and all sorts of people throughout the Middle East who never had access to live events except through the constrained, controlled press of their government before, are now very often to see events in their own region live and on television. The Bush administration clearly knows it needs to win hearts and minds in the region, but is having a difficult time. Since September 11, it has become clear just how much antipathy there is in the region itself, particularly because of the struggle between the Israelis and the Palestinians. We asked ABC's Jim Wooten to put together a Middle East report for us.
In the Muslim world, very little sympathy for America's losses. Instead, anti-American celebrations and demonstrations, and here perhaps an explanation of sorts. America pretends this is the century of democracy, this woman says. But where is democracy, and where are human rights for Palestinians? And that is the crux of it. The U.S. alliance with Israel versus Muslim support for Palestinians. And as the conflict between Israelis and Palestinians continues, so do anti-American passions, fueled by those who don't believe the U.S. war on terrorism is strictly that. Many insist it's against all Muslims. It doesn't much matter that that isn't true, and it doesn't help to debate it. Public opinion here along the Nile, all across Egypt, and in most other Arab countries is pretty well set in concrete and hasn't changed in months. And that opinion is this: the West is waging a war against Islam in behalf of Israel, or in some versions, in behalf of the Jews. Which is why Osama bin Laden's a hero to many Muslims, and his enemies theirs as well. Even moderate Arabs like Hafez al-Marazi, an American citizen from Egypt, says it's all about the Middle East.
They are not disappointed in Israel because they don't expect anything out of the government of Israel, but they are disappointed in the U.S. because they have high expectations.
Yet in the Muslim world, anti-Americanism was flourishing even before last September 11. And for a long time after this first anniversary, it seems certain to remain. Jim Wooten, ABC News, Cairo.
Anti-Americanism always flourishes with some people in the Middle East. On the other hand, there's wild pro-Americanism among a lot of other people as well. Let's go to Cairo live because ABC's Bob Woodruff is there. Bob, we're having the debate in this country now about the Israelis and the Palestinians and what's going to happen with the U.S. and Saddam Hussein. What's the latest from Cairo on that?
Well, as you said, Peter, before, a lot of sympathy here, but not support. This is pretty typical of the newspapers that came out in the Arab world today. A 22-page insert, news about the attack on the World Trade Center 1 year ago, and then new reporting on the background of Osama bin Laden. There has been sympathy expressed by just about every Arab country over here for the innocent victims of 9/11, but not much support, as you said before. In fact, from some Arab countries you wouldn't expect it from Syria, which said that they expressed their condolences for the victims, but they said that Arabs are also victims of this. From Iran, of U.S. policy rather, also from Iran, they also expressed sympathy and condolences for the United States, but they also said that the United States now needs to make the next move to try to open up and expand relationships with Iran and the rest of the Arab world. What is absolutely unanimous over here, Peter, is that the bombing of Baghdad, led by the United States or involving the United States, would be a very bad idea. They are afraid that Baghdad, or Iraq rather, could split up into three pieces: the Kurds in the north, the Sunni Muslims in the middle, and the Shiites in the south, and that could expand and destabilize this entire area. And they believe that if there is an attack on Iraq and Saddam Hussein is overthrown, that this could simply bolster Israel and the interests of the Israelis. Peter?
Bob, you've spent a lot of time on the streets in the Arab world. How different is the opinion? How different is opinion in the street from the government? And the press, which you held up this evening, is certainly in Egypt and a great many other places, to a large measure, government controlled.
That's right, Peter. I don't know. I think at this point there's a lot of agreement between the leaders in the Arab world and the people on the street. You ask them how prevalent these feelings are about resentment of the United States, and they say now, for the first time, it really is across the board. You've had President Bush getting on TV and people seeing him say, for example, that Ariel Sharon, the head of Israel, is a man of peace. Juxtaposed against those words are images of Palestinian children being killed. This is what people see on the streets now. The leaders know it, the leaders see the same thing, and they tend to agree with the people on the street that something needs to be done. So you're seeing some unanimity here, Peter, that you didn't see before.
I appreciate it, Bob. Thanks very much, Bob Woodruff, our correspondent in Cairo tonight. I want to turn to two people here now who are genuinely, I think, can be regarded as experts in the region. On my immediate right is Fawaz Gerges, who is the professor of Middle East and International Affairs at Sarah Lawrence College and has been with us before. And to his right, Fareed Zakaria, who is the editor of Newsweek International. Can I just ask you first the question about starting with you, Fareed, with Al Jazeera? I remember being stunned in the Arab world and thinking, my God, for the first time, public opinion in the Arab world actually means something because people can share these live events in a way they never could before.
The mystery of Al Jazeera, Peter, is that it is the most free, not just television channel, but probably media form in the Arab world. And it is in many ways more anti-American than the state. Society in the Arab world is often more anti-Semitic, anti-American, illiberal in various forms than the state, because you have in the Arab world many societies that have been politically repressed for so long that when you open up a valve, what comes out is a tornado.
And Fareed, I often feel the same thing, that when we get this deep antipathy on the streets, and I realize you can't judge by the streets completely in the Middle East, they're really angrier at their own government than they ever are at us.
Well, yes, but let me add one footnote to what Fareed said. I think what Al Jazeera and LBC and others have done, LBC, the Lebanese
broadcasting company,
that the government can no longer control information, the flow of information. And as such, public opinion now has become a factor in the political equation. But I don't know, I have difficulty, Peter, just dumping all the problems on the bloody authoritarian governments. I mean, there are some real issues here, real issues which have to do with American foreign policy. I think the perception that American foreign policy has been insensitive to Muslim Arab concerns. I mean, take a look at what the administration has done in the last 1 year. I mean, there was a great deal of empathy for the American victims after 9/11. But then, since then, I mean, we were very reassured that the administration would really take concrete steps, at least to rethink some of its foreign policies in the region. But, well, what has happened? Hands-off approach toward the Arab-Israeli conflict, a militaristic posture toward Iraq, insensitivity to Muslim concerns. The administration is using democracy as a stick against its enemies, and not rather than as an alternative, a framework to replace the dominant authoritarian structures. And I think these elements, rather than using really media gimmicks to influence public opinion, we need to focus on the substantive relationship between that part of the world and the United States.
Let me ask Fareed, in some respects, the same question. Do you think this has been a bad year for the United States in the region as a whole, with the exception of the support that President Bush has given the Sharon government in Israel?
Oh, I think it's been a bad year. I think that part of what we face in the Arab world is who we are. Just the most powerful country in the world, a country that controls the destiny of these people who seem to be going nowhere in their view. But part of it is what we do. And we haven't been doing well in the Arab world. I think a lot of it is sins of omission. I think that we could have been much more engaged. We could have seemed to care. Even if you look at the way we have gone about the campaign against Iraq, it's almost as though we're dragged kicking and screaming to consult with allies, to go to the United Nations. Now, we're going to have to do it all anyway. But if we had started out in a very different mode, listening and leading, building a consensus, or look at Afghanistan. We are now agreeing with the idea that you need security outside of Kabul.
Let me give you something small, but not small at all. And what should the United States be doing at a time like this? When the Palestinians, who've been struggling with the Israelis for almost 50 years and have lived under occupation for a long time, began to use suicide bombers against Israeli citizens. How did the Bush administration have any choice but to say this was horrendous and push the Palestinians off the map?
Absolutely, and I think the Palestinian leadership made some very strategic blunders, not only in not appreciating the impact, the great impact of 9/11 and its really effects on the American public and the American leadership, but also in not appreciating the fact that suicide bombings are morally wrong. This is point one. But also, I think, on the other hand, we need to appreciate the difficult conditions under which Palestinians live. No one is suggesting that the administration should support, the current Palestinian leadership, but at the same time, what is the vision that we have for the Middle East?
Okay, let me I wish we had we all three of us know how complicated this is, but let's just take one issue. The president's coming to the United Nations this week. He's going to be tough on the United Nations for not forcing the Iraqis to abide by the resolutions. There's going to be a new one, perhaps. Fareed, if the United States attacks Iraq, you heard Bob Woodruff say there'll be turmoil in the Arab world. Do you really believe that?
I don't, actually. I think that if it goes well militarily, which I think it will, there will be 2 or 3 bad weeks, after which people will be presented with a new reality. The real struggle for the hearts and minds of the Arab world will not be the war against Iraq, it will be the post-war handling of Iraq.
Because lots of people in the region like to get rid of Saddam Hussein, it's not just the Israelis.
And on the street, Saddam Hussein is despised because everyone realizes this man is a totalitarian. If we build a modern Iraq, a progressive Iraq, a pro-modern country, we might really be able to change or begin to change the Arab world. But that's where a lot
So
of
it's the follow-through, it's the staying power.
It's the staying power, which is very long, expensive, and difficult, and which, frankly, looking at Afghanistan, the Bush administration has not wanted to do.
Fareed, I'm going to give you the last word. I'd like you to make it, if you would, about Saudi Arabia, because it has been an up-and-down relationship for much of its history, which goes back to the Second World War, but it has been very difficult, given the fact that so many of these hijackers a year ago today were Saudis.
Absolutely.
What happens?
I think there's a great deal of social upheaval under the surface in Saudi Arabia. I think there's a great deal of tensions between the government and the Islamist opposition. And I think for so long, these particular tensions have not really been examined and analyzed. But I think at the other hand, we have to ask the question, can we afford to sacrifice the strategic relationship between Saudi Arabia and the United States? And what's the alternative to the Saudi Arabian royal family? Because we know, as Fareed mentioned, that the dominant opposition tends to be much more anti-American than the existing, authoritarian governments. The tragedy of Arab politics, Peter, is that both the existing governments and the dominant oppositions are anti-democratic and anti-liberal. In fact, and the question is, how can you have democracy if you have very few Democrats in the Arab world?
Many thanks to both of you. We read you regularly here, both you, Fareed, in Newsweek, and you in a variety of newspapers. It's really nice to listen to you today. Thanks very much. Fawaz, Gerges, and Fareed, Zakaria. We are going to be right back. First, another September 11th postscript. Kimalaya Nyoma is a medical student at Stanford University. He's a member of the Maasai tribe in Kenya. After seeing the September 11th attacks, he returned to Kenya and told his tribe about the destruction. The Maasai had trouble with the concept of collapsed skyscrapers and thousands of deaths, but they wanted to fulfill their duty as warriors. 9 months after the attacks, the Maasai blessed 14 cows and gave them as cherished gifts to an American diplomat in Kenya.
When we come back, New York firemen and policemen honor their fallen comrades in a most unusual way. Plus, they had to help in any way they could. Meet the unsung heroes of 9/11. And where did all the money go? Billions were donated to 9/11 disaster relief funds. But is the money going to where it's needed most? Then, in tonight's special coverage, Diane Sawyer with stories of 61 mothers and 63 precious reasons for hope. 9/11 continues on ABC.